Aloha today, and aloha to everybody. Glad to see you all. Again today, welcome to the third webinar in the Pacific Desk 2021 webinar series. I'm David Hitzel. I'm communicating the weather, ready nation, media, and disaster preparedness. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. This is being recorded for documentational purposes and being posted simultaneously on our Facebook Live. Please leave any questions in the comment section, either here on Zoom or in Facebook Live. And please, questions can also be asked questions can also be asked at the end of the talk. There'll be an oral questioning period. Please refrain from having your video or audio switched on unless you're actively asking a question. And lastly, since the video is going to be recorded, we'll be posting it on YouTube at some later date pretty soon. Okay, so before I move on, I want to say, to put today's webinar in context a little bit. So in the Pacific Desk, we train people in weather forecasting and science and meteorology. Pacific Desk is a program that's actually managed by the Telecommunications and Social Informatics Program, TOSI. You may have heard of us as TOSI, which is under the umbrella Science Research Institute at the University of Hawaii. Well, weather forecasting has strong societal impacts, and the science of meteorology, therefore, has, well, not necessarily therefore, but it does have daily interaction with society in a way that other science do not. So it can be argued that being a good weather forecaster is equal parts being a good scientist and a good communicator. Okay, some other housekeeping, upcoming weather method. Haven't quite got that one settled yet. The other one is one that's AV-based. So this one is pretty much all put together. It's just I haven't been able to nail down a date that would be the pilot who will be presenting. So one of the unique things we do in Guam for the Pacific Desk training is we have a pilot from one of the airlines come and speak to the Pacific Desk participants, kind of about what the pilot perspective is, what's most important to them about the weather information that's put out by the Weather Service and other outlets. Okay, so today's panel, we have Landon Idlet. He is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service, the WFO Guam. And he's been at WFO Guam since June 2010, where he was a forecaster with duties that included issuing weather forecasts and helping to maintain a 24/7 weather watch for the Marianas and Micronesian Islands from Palau to the Marshalls. During severe weather events, he provides decision support services through heavy weather briefs at the Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Homeland Security Office. He became WFO Guam's Warning Coordination Meteorologist in May 2020, and he now serves as the WFO liaison to the region in communicating weather forecasts, hazards, and warnings, and to ensure the region is an active part of the NWS Weather Ready Nation through weather awareness, communication, education, and preparedness. So Landon is a certified instructor for the FEMA AWR 217 Tsunami Awareness course through the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, and has delivered the course to decision makers of the federal and territorial governments and response personnel of the Marianas. He is passionate about outreach through engagement with core partners and organizations to promote weather preparedness. So prior to his arrival on Guam, Landon was stationed at the U.S. Army's Kwajalein Reagan Test Site in the Marshall Islands. He served as a launch weather officer for SpaceX launches and U.S. military missile defense tests, and he graduated from the North Carolina State University in 2005 with a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology. Okay, so like I said in the title, the main focus is in the communications and disaster preparedness that we're going to talk about today are Weather Ready Nation and social media. So in case you're not familiar with Weather Ready Nation, Ready Nation is NOAA's active approach to readying communities for extreme weather water events. So the way I look, Landon's been involved in this very thoroughly for several years. Just looked at it from the outside. But the way I see Weather Ready Nation is it's one part education or preparation within it's setting up and solidifying lines of communication in extreme weather events. And then at the same time, it's helping to educate the community in your way possible and how it may affect them directly. So anybody that is a stakeholder or a business owner in a community can join Weather Ready Nation as an ambassador. Land a little more into detail on that. And then the other topic is social media. So many go to social media now for their news, including myself in a certain way. So every morning when I wake up, I check Twitter. I check the top trending things throughout, basically worldwide. I do this not for my news. I just do this to see what's on the mind of many of the other humans on the globe, and then I go off and try to find more reliable sources than Twitter. But the important thing about this, and I think that Landon's going to discuss, is social media is kind of a catch-22. It's a blessing and a curse. So it's the upside to it is it's a free megaphone to spread your message to the wider public and basically worldwide. But at the same time, social media is the way I see it, it's a mixture of truth, half-truths, and often outright fabrication. So anytime you're broadcasting your message on there, it's suddenly put on equal footing with other messages that may not have the same intent that the Weather Service has. So the Weather Service purpose is to protect life and property, and that's not necessarily the motivation of a lot of other people on Twitter. So the difficulty is that all the messages are on equal footing. So you have to. It's a realm of what you would call competing narratives. So in this environment, it's important to have a consistent presence. You got to be there. You got to have your voice heard as an official voice. But in that context, you got to maintain professionalism, and you got to. I stole this from Landon's slides. You got to use inclusive language. So you want to use language that everybody can understand. Like if you're going to say things like meridional and zonal, you gotta put those in a context that people can understand. Okay, so before I let Landon take over, this talk comes from a presentation he did with one of my groups back in January 2020, back when we could still all meet in person in Guam. And when he did this particular presentation, I just thought, oh, this is, I haven't in a while seen a perfect presentation where nothing should be taken out, nothing needs to be added. And so it had always been on my mind to include this as part of the webinar series. Okay, so with that, I will pass it over to Landon.
All right, thank you very much, David. And I also want to acknowledge Jenna Bloss over here. She's one of my counterparts. We work very closely together. She's with the Guam Homeland Security Office of Civil Defense, and she's the public spokesperson for the agency there. And so we're very like that. We're very tightly coordinated within our offices because we have to have that one combined voice. So it's great to see you here, Jenna. Let me see about sharing my screen here. And I hope there's no disaster. So do you all see my slide?
I do.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay, good. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about several different presentations that David mentioned. The first one being, of course, communicating in the face of disaster. And we're going to be looking at how we communicate as weather folks, climate folks, emergency managers in our jurisdictions, how we communicate best so that our message is well received by the community that we are here to serve. And I'll be looking at the Weather Ready Nation and social media. So it's going to be a combination of several presentations all into this one large discussion. So let me go over to my screen. So when you're looking at a typhoon sitting nearly on top of you, how are you going to communicate that situation? If you're looking at the picture, that's Super Typhoon U2, and that was sitting just offshore of Tinian and Saipan back on October 24th, 2018. It made a direct passage over top of Tinian and then went on past. That was one of the largest and strongest typhoons to ever strike American soil. When you're a weather forecaster, how do you communicate such impacts to a vulnerable population that's sitting literally under top of that disaster that's unfolding as you're sitting in the office? How do you communicate that? How do you communicate beforehand to the people that could be anywhere in that possible strike path of a typhoon? When this thing was developing days earlier, it looked like it could be a possible hit from anywhere from Guam, Tinian, Rota, and Saipan, or a miss keeping well off to the east. How do you convey these uncertainties, these principles that this thing could develop into a monster typhoon and either hit your island or miss you altogether? Well, this is what we're going to be talking about, how to craft your message in a way that people can understand it. And so this next slide, various weather threats in the Western North Pacific. We have any number of threats that can strike any time of the year. That includes flash floods, hazardous seas, dangerous surf, rip currents, earthquakes, tsunami, lightning strikes even. A lot of times people don't think we have a lot of lightning problems here, but if you can hear thunder, you're in danger. And so the common rule of thumb is when thunder roars, get indoors. And if you're hard of hearing, when lightning flashes, dash inside. So keep those in mind. Also the drought. We just wrapped up our final drought information statement for the region. We've been issuing those out of our office every 2 weeks since March of 2020. That can be a particularly devastating impact to the vulnerable outer islands across any of our states where they depend on the rainfall. A lot of people want fine weather, beautiful sunny skies, but if you have too much sunny skies without that rainfall, without those storms, that can lead to problems. And then more notably are the tropical cyclones and typhoons. And so tropical cyclones, they get a lot of publicity in our region because we are Typhoon Alley of the globe. We have the bragging right for the most tropical cyclone activity of anywhere on Earth. But these other impacts above, those are the ones that come sometimes with little warning, like those flash flood events, the hazardous seas and surf that can inundate small low-lying islands, including atolls. Before these weather threats begin, what typically happens? A lot of times people have access to model data, whether it's windy webpage, other weather models that's available on the internet. People will see things spinning up in the models, usually like on day 8, 9, 10 of the long-range models. The global forecast system, that spins up typhoons pretty rapidly in some of the longer trends. And then people will see this on day 10, a typhoon sitting over top of Guam or near Yap or Palau. And they posted to social media, oh my gosh, there's going to be a typhoon over Palau in 10 days. And that spreads like wildfire. How do you counteract that as being part of the official warning agency, whether you're in emergency management or in weather? We have to combat that. So before a weather threat hits, the chatter increases. Rumors tend to spread. Speculation abounds. People become panicked and full of worry and fear. And this has been also very common in the Philippines, particularly after the passage of Super Typhoon Haiyan. I think that was back in 2013. The Filipinos took such a dramatic hit from that storm that when there's any fear or threat of a possible typhoon anywhere in the Western Micronesia or even east of Guam, the Filipinos are well aware of the possibilities and are already starting to talk about that. So on our Facebook page here at the National Weather Service on Guam, we get a lot of messages and comments from not just Guam and the Mariana Islands, but also from the Philippines. Will it enter PAR? That's the Philippine Area of Responsibility. Will it strike the Philippines? And so we have to be on top of that and ready to communicate that accordingly. And also in the modern day, fake news. So anytime there's incorrect or news is being published, whether they have the correct information, but they attribute it or communicate it incorrectly, we have to be ready to set the record straight, because we are the weather folks in charge of putting out the best information for the protection of life and property. So where can you get official weather forecasts and hazards information? Well, you have to go to the weather agencies that's in charge of that information, and we have to make sure we're putting that information out there. So I'm going to go through a chronology of our communication strategy here at the Guam office in the modern era. That's in the last 10 years is where I'm focusing on. So next week, I will be marking 11 years here at the Weather Forecast Office on Guam. I came here on June 17th, 2010, and I became a forecaster on June 21st. So I'm excited to mark another anniversary. So prior to 2012, our information went out via our webpage. That's weather.gov/GUM. Also our fax server and the NOAA weather radio, or the 211 hotline if you're on Guam. In 2012, the fax server ended. And that was of particular importance because the fax server took all of our text bulletins, our routine forecasts, but also those hazard alerts. If we issued a short fused weather alert, such as a flash flood warning for a heavy shower or thunderstorm moving over the island, we would issue that bulletin and it would get transmitted to everyone on our fax server, including media. So they would have the latest, most up-to-date information. But after 2012, that fax server was discontinued, and you have to go to our webpage to find the latest information. So when we're entering or putting out short fused weather-driven bulletins, the media may not have that. And so they might be playing old forecast information on the radio or publishing old information at the newspaper when we have alerts going out on the webpage. And so the general public utilized our webpage and our 211 hotline for that weather information. And of course, it set up very little interaction between the weather office and the public, except for when the media would come into our office for a significant weather threat, such as a developing disturbance somewhere across Eastern Micronesia. In 2013, the NWS Guam began use of Facebook. And so we had a slow and meager start as we had to determine how we would use that Facebook page and where we wanted it to go. But the overarching thing with social media, you have to build your presence. If you do not post regularly, you have a very weak following because your presentation's weak. So you have to build that dependability, that reliability and accountability. So when weather threatens, people know where they can go to find that information, and then also dig deeper for the finer details, and that's to our webpage. And we link that to most of our Facebook posts. The beauties of Facebook and social media, it was a new venue to disseminate weather information. It allowed direct public interaction with the Weather Service via comments and messages, and it allowed the meteorologist on duty to talk to the user. It humanized the forecast process. So you're no longer dealing with a government agency when looking at a webpage, but you're actually talking to a human that's sitting at the desk in the operations. The other useful aspect of social media that I really learned from was where people had confusion. If people didn't understand a forecast or the terminology we were using as far as like a warning process, or well, what does an advisory mean? That allows the forecaster to know where these weak points are, where people don't understand what we're conveying, and how we can add elaboration to it, how we can further explain our terminology, what we're trying to convey to the people. As an agency, we're focused very much on science and technology, but you also have to focus on the communication side of things, because if we're putting out the life-saving information to people and they don't understand what it means, we're not fully meeting our job duties, because we are to meet those needs to protect life and property, and we have to make sure they understand that stuff. In 2017, the Guam office, we began our engagement with the Weather Service Weather Ready Nation initiative. This is an agency-wide initiative that began in 2014, but the Guam office, we did not get fully involved into it in 2017, and then we started our big push. So again, this is an agency-wide outreach initiative to build those contacts and partnerships with people in the community, different organizations, businesses, offices, schools, to really focus on awareness, education, and outreach. And that's where we put our focus out of the Guam office, was on those three principles. Um, Eventually, when COVID can pass away, and I like to get down to Micronesia, I really want to push this outreach initiative across Micronesia and work with our weather service offices to really dig into the community and meet people, meet businesses, organizations, and help bring people to the light of weather forecasting and communications, and really help make sure everyone across the full spectrum of our community is fully engaged and aware of where to get accurate and reliable weather information and be maximally prepared for any and all weather threats in our region. And so again, these three principles, awareness, we issue a daily Weather Ready Nation alert email. This is one of our tangible items of the outreach initiative. We send that to our Weather Ready Nation ambassadors, and that's what we call our partner organizations, ambassadors of the Weather Ready Nation. And we do these weather alerts prior to and during a significant weather event. That's not a flash flood event that comes up with a half hour of lead time or less. This is something more broader scale, like a tropical cyclone developing, and sometimes other events like significant drought situations. We issue these daily alerts to bring instant awareness to developing situation. This usually goes hand in hand with our special weather statements. That's a formalized text bulletin to say, this is what's going on near this island, and it could become this, and this is this. Go here for more information. And again, it's designed to be brief, plain language, and to the point, utilizing an infographic to show people what the threat is, where it is, and who's possibly threatened by it, and what timeline, and where to go for more information. The education aspect, we focus heavily on schools, to get into the schools to speak to classes, talk about weather, careers in weather, and preparedness, and then also open them up to our office for field trips to come learn about careers in meteorology, electronics technicians, IT, and then also learn how we do our job, the different tools and equipment and devices that we use to forecast weather. And then for outreach, we do a lot of outreach around the year, more so when COVID's not a problem. But Jenna and I work closely with Homeland Security, that if Homeland Security has an outreach event, we like to participate with them as much as possible. And likewise, if our office is holding an outreach event, we like to invite our partners as well to join us. Also in 2017, the National Weather Service started its focus in social science. And for me, this was where I really found my niche in the National Weather Service, really working with people. So in 2017, the Weather Service headquarters partnered with social scientists at the University of Alabama, and they offered a social science meteorology course in Kansas City at the Weather Service Training Center. This was a 5-month course with 2 week-long residencies in February and July 2017. There were 40 of us from across the National Weather Service and national headquarters that attended the course, and it was designed for each member of this course to generate a social science research around a question that they wanted to help within their office operations. And so what question did they answer? Well, my research was focused on how do people on Guam get their weather information? And this was inspired by a paddling incident on Guam just a month prior in January of 2017. We had high surf advisories and a small craft advisory in effect for dangerous seas and surf conditions. And as I was going to what's known as the Ganya Boat Basin or Paseo Park on central Guam, I was going out there to check out the waves and the surf heights to see if there's any inundation at this park and what kind of wave height, so I could call it into the office as a surf observation. As I'm walking to the shore, I see this team of paddlers, 6 people in a paddle boat, going out of the inlet, going right towards the waves, I guess, for practice. And I was kind of in shock that this was going on in these conditions. And so I watched them, and immediately as they got into the mouth of the inlet, they started having problems. The side arm broke off, and the boat capsized right there in the middle of the mouth of the Ganya Boat Basin. And so we had a dangerous situation at that point. There were 6 people floating around trying to fight for leverage in the water conditions that were pulling them out and sloshing them around with the waves. Fortunately, that rescue boat in the lower left picture, they were docked right there in the boat basin and were scrambled and able to get out there within 5 minutes and plucked all of them out of the water. Some of them had some pretty good scrapes and scratches from the coral that they were thrust against in the water, but they were all able to go home that night and have dinner with their families. These situations don't often turn out so good. So I was relieved to see that, but I was very concerned why these people went out in those boat conditions. The guy running that crew that day was involved in a water rescue. I think it was back in 2011 when we had paddlers out there in a surf warning situation in Tumon Bay, in which several canoes capsized, and I think it was 2 or 3 people drowned because of the 15-foot surf that was splashing up against Tumon Bay. So he knew better and how dangerous the conditions can be. After this event, we called for an island-wide meeting of coaches and managers of all the paddling teams on Guam, had them in our office to talk about water safety, and the Coast Guard was a part of that. So this research, I surveyed 800 folks across Guam, looking at specifics on frequency of getting and searching for weather information, sources used for getting that weather information, modalities to get that information, and the use of social media, because similar research shows that most people in the States get their weather information from broadcast meteorologists, wireless emergency alerts, and social media. And here in Guam and across Micronesia, we do not have that broadcast meteorology side of the weather enterprise. So that's more importance for the Weather Service and our Weather Service offices across the region to really communicate the weather and the threats. One of the questions I asked was if and how weather information alerts can be better communicated. 71% of surveyed said yes. And so I offered 8 different options for people to get that weather information: TV, social media, radio, web pages, newspaper, phone apps, NOAA Weather Radio, and 211 Weather Hotline. And of all the age groups, you can see the variety. The 18 to 29 or the 18 to 39, they favor social media, followed by apps on your phone. The last ranking of all age groups was 211 or NOAA Weather Radio. The older folks, they typically get their weather information from radio and TV. So on July 21st, I will turn 40. So I guess my means of weather information, I will go from social media to radio next month. So I need to find my favorite radio stations. That's a joke. But yeah, that's where we are. Most people get it from social media and apps and then broadcast media. Do you use social media? 89% of surveyed said yes, they use social media. And the top ranking social media platform here on Guam is Facebook, followed by a distant second, which is Instagram. And then third is Twitter. I was speaking recently with the ambassador to the FSM about social media a couple months ago, and she said that if you want to communicate anything across Micronesia, you have to do it by way of Facebook, because that's the best way to get that information out. Twitter is not so much a thing across Micronesia, but Facebook is where the communications are. Can local weather information alerts be better communicated? 71% again said yes, and this is what they want. So I took all the text responses from that question on how it can be better related, and I put it into word cloud. And what word sticks out the most? Weather. And from weather, they want more weather information. And this is what people are looking for when it comes to communications. They want more weather, more information, more alerts. This is where we in the weather enterprise need to be as far as communicating that information. If our Facebook page is absent 7, 8, 9, 10 days without any updates, are we doing a good job conveying information? Probably not that good of a job. Even if it's fair weather outside most of the days, there's still stuff going on that we can talk about somewhere in the region. So in a sense, the National Weather Service got involved in social science. We're looking at the communications, and we are really asking the question, what do people want? And of course, you've probably seen this graphic on Facebook talking about how men communicate and how women communicate. Well, this is what I use for weather and government communications. What do people want? They want that clear, plain language message, but sometimes the government bulletins, our communications can look like a plate of spaghetti. It's confusing. What does this mean? There's so much jargon. How do you communicate this information? And so we have to figure out how to explain ourselves so that everyone, the non-meteorologists, can understand us. So the mission for today in the Weather Service, again, we're focused much on science and technology, providing that life-saving information. But the vision for tomorrow is for a weather-ready nation where society is prepared for and responds to weather and water events so that communities are ready, responsive, and resilient. And so one of the ways that we do this here on Guam is through our heavy weather briefs and our impacts-based decision support services. This is a big thing in the National Weather Service agency-wide called IDSS. And this is focused on helping the meteorologists learn to talk to the community, talk to our partners, and give them that information they need to make decisions. So if we're issuing a typhoon watch or warning for Guam, I'll be working closely with the Guam Homeland Security Office, the Homeland Security Administrator and their advisor to the governor, and working with the governor's office to put out the best information so they can make the proper decisions to go into conditions for the island, whether to maintain business as normal or to shut the island down and start preparations. And so this is an ongoing process that begins in a good scenario a week before any significant weather threat passes. And oftentimes it can be much less time than that because of the variety of weather scenarios that we have. Sometimes we have tropical systems develop nearly overhead, and those are the situations that I most like the least, because you have to be communicating the possibilities, the threats, where things are, and the possible timeline of quick actions and decisions to be made. And so this was back in 2018 during Typhoon Mangkhut, as we had that typhoon pass over top of Rota and graze Guam just to the north. So Guam made out pretty nice, but Rota not so well. And then later that year was Super Typhoon U2 that passed over Tini and the Saipan. So again, Guam's been very fortunate in recent years. It's just a matter of time when we take that hit. So the IDSS, that is a key aspect of Guam operations now for nearly 2 decades. So we've been doing what the Weather Service is focusing on before they were focusing on it. This is a part of our existence here in Guam and in the region. We do those heavy weather briefs daily, multiple briefings with Homeland Security partners and other agencies in advance of significant weather threats. And the WCM here, myself, will be communicating frequently with Guam and the CNMI EOC directors via WhatsApp. This has been a huge plus for communications since I took office a year and a half ago, communicating on WhatsApp, giving those quick updates, and then going more formal with our communications if it warrants. And then we hold the video conferences with the WSO managers and Pacific Region headquarters. This is, again, to bring us all together so we have that familiarity of meeting together, talking together, because if we go for a long period of time, it's harder to have conversation, communication with each other. And so the more communication, the better, especially for the people we work with and the people we work for. 2018, the Weather Ready Nation, we started the email alerts out of our office. And this is what it looks like. Many of you in this call are probably receiving these email alerts from my office. And it meets that need from the research that I completed in 2018. When facing a weather threat, people want to know what the threat is, what it means to them, those impacts, and when. And so this is the tangible, one of the most visible items of the Weather Ready Nation here in our region, one of our most successful, because it provides that weather information direct to the people. Our social media, you have to look for it. Our webpage, you have to find the webpage and then navigate our webpage to find the right information you're looking for. But this will provide that information and the web links specific to those text bulletins so that the user can get the information directly and it's instant awareness. And based on the research, this is a plain language bulletin so that our media can take it and read it word for word on the air of the radio. And I've had this feedback from a number of radio stations that they really like these alerts because they can take it and in one cut make a single recording word for word, and it's understandable. So plain language, easy to read and understand, tells the reader what they want to know, uses an infographic that they can share also on their social media pages or within their organizations. When to expect new information, where to go for more information, and it also provides a point of contact with the weather office typically that will be me. So if you want to talk to me about Weather Ready Nation and forecasts and outlooks, give me a holler. I am very receptive to emails and phone calls because everyone matters. 2019, we started focusing on Facebook Live to meet another need of broadcasting because we don't have that broadcast sector in the meteorology realm in the region. Facebook Live has been a huge plus to our social media platforms to really take a camera and go into our computer screen and show people exactly what we're looking at. What is this little feature here? What does that mean? Where is it going to be going? How does it impact? And what are the people over here on this island? If it's not raining there, well, is it going to rain? And so we have that conversation a lot with tropical cyclones. People can be between rain bands and they think the storm's over, but in fact, they might be about 30 minutes away from getting a heavy, heavy rain band training over top of them. And so we can point stuff out to them live on Facebook. And the other beauty of Facebook Live is people can ask questions while you're broadcasting and you can answer to those questions. And that was a huge advancement in our communications during Typhoon Mangkhut back in September 2018. We had some news organizations here in our office, and that was the first time broadcasting live with local news. So why use social media operationally? Well, it's additional popular method to communicate. It's active information flow via social media versus the passive flow of our web pages. Social media is interactive. We can operate with the public, and we should operate with the public because we're going to be feeding and answering questions and comments from people in the community, solving questions and helping them understand problems as they arise. The information is shareable, reaches many people with ease. We call them force multipliers when agencies and organizations take our posts and share them with their large base, such as broadcast media. If we post something that the broadcast media will also share on their pages, we have a much, much larger reach instantly. And that's what we want to go for, not because we want the likes and the shares, but we want as many people to get that information as possible. And it also builds trust and credibility of our office. So to bring it all together, you should communicate often. If the community is talking about the weather, the local weather official should be leading that discussion, because when the community partners are talking weather and they're not getting their weather information from you, but from other social media pages, other people in the community, there might be incorrect information circulating. So when people are talking about the weather service, the weather office should be leading that discussion. When the experts fail to communicate, people will fill the void, usually with rumors and false information. And an example of that, I have a friend that works at the hospital here, and he'll tell me that some of the nurses in the hospital are talking about a typhoon hitting Guam in 3 or 4 days. And I said, oh, really? When is it going to hit us? How bad is it going to be? Well, I don't know, this is going to be a pretty strong one. I said, well, let me know what happens. And in fact, there's might be social media posts circulating from a model graphic that somebody posted showing a typhoon over Guam in 4 or 5 days. But 6 hours later, there's nothing there. It's a mere disturbance. And so chatter spreads rapidly like wildfire, especially when it's a high impact event possible. And that will escalate as we go into the typhoon season, the busier months of the year, like August and September. So we have to be ready to counteract that information. How to use social media operationally? We use infographics that conveys much information in a glance. Typically, the more text, the less people will read, because you're on your phone. You'll be scrolling on your phone. And if you see that see more, most people probably will not click that see more to see the full text, or if it opens up into several screens worth of text, they're going to keep on going to the next social media post. But that's not always true. Sometimes people will read through the end of it to pull in all the information, and I've tested that theory several times. People process visuals faster than text. Images are very easy to share, especially for the media. You'll see them on broadcast media, social media pages, and sometimes they take our infographics and print them in the newspaper for the next morning. The users tend to understand the information presented better than if it's in text. And of course, buy-in from local media exposes our information and communications to a much larger audience than we would on our own. So how to communicate? Again, keep it simple. You're talking to non-scientists, non-meteorologists. They may not understand the terminology like vortex, vortices, advisories. What does an advisory mean? What does it mean that a high surf advisory is in effect for east-facing reefs? Well, which reefs are east-facing? How much is an advisory? We have to explain that information very detailed so that people can understand it. Give more quantitative values. Don't use extra words. Be straightforward and to the point. Don't be anecdotal and use cliches. Read your writing out loud. Does it sound unnatural? Also, as an agency, use you and we because it shows familiarity and it softens the message. Again, we don't want to be portrayed as a government agency. We want to be portrayed as people, but you have to keep that official tone of voice and still sound authoritative. Write the way you talk, speak directly to the reader. Imagine yourself talking to your grandmother who's not a meteorologist. If she says, is it going to rain tomorrow? Is it going to be weather tomorrow? How would you explain the weather to your grandmother? This is how we want to write, in a sense. Remove the jargon, the acronyms, the ambiguous language, and be specific when speaking of locations and times. Don't say the forecast period. Well, what is the forecast period? Is it 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours? If you talk of the local area, are we talking about the local area to Guam? Are we talking about the local area to the Mariana Islands? Are we talking about the local area to Palau? We want to give specific locations, specific times, so that people have the best information. And again, science and technology and social science and communication, the job is not complete with just a good forecast. People need to receive and understand it. And so finally, in closing, again, the force multipliers, that's our community. The broadcast news media, the Homeland Security partners, Jenna Bloss, again, thank you for your fantastic efforts communicating weather and all threats in the region. The emergency managers, U.S. government offices and non-governmental organizations, and even the elected leaders. You want to reach out and have those relationships with people. When it comes to us, the Weather Service here on Guam, the Weather Service, the broadcast news media, and the Homeland Security partners, we form a three-legged stool because we're all in this life-saving business together as one entity. If one of those legs falls off, that stool will topple because we need each other. And if we can have those tight relationships between our office, the Homeland Security, and the news media, our message will be concise, consistent, and effective, reaching everyone in as many ways as possible. So final thoughts, when you're up against fake news, we should address this head on. And we've done that several times on our Facebook page when rumors are spreading rapidly ahead of a possible tropical cyclone threat. Be proactive. Communication should be direct and authoritative, not combative or confrontational. If the public is speaking about the weather, we must be in that discussion, even leading it. When folks are facing a possible life-threatening situation, forecast accuracy and effective communication are equally important. And finally, effective communication humanizes our job. We are no longer an agency or a bureau. In times of fear and life-threatening situations, people want that human factor for comfort. Sometimes they may be messaging our page, calling our phone numbers, and it may be a high-stress, high-intensity event that you're dealing with. But if you take that time to focus on that person, what they're saying, their fears, their concerns, their worry, that will make all the difference. Your message may not be a good message that they want to hear. It may be getting worse for them, but the time that you spend talking to that one person on the phone call may make all the difference for that person, the family that's huddled in their house, taking cover from a super typhoon. And that was exactly what happened during Super Typhoon U2. We had so many calls into our facility from Saipan, people in fear for their lives as their houses were being ripped apart around them. Those phone calls to our office, wondering how long is it going to last? How much worse is it going to be? But getting a human to answer the phone, that voice on the other side, just to be with them through that time of fear made all the difference for them. So take that time, communicate. And they want to know more than anything that we are out here watching for them. And so this last slide, this is a poster that I created for a conference a couple years ago about the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Initiative across the Pacific. And again, we've been very active with this initiative in our region because we really want to build those contacts with everyone, everywhere possible. We want to let people know who we are, what we do, and that we are here to help them and communicate with them and to protect their life and property, because everyone matters. So if you're not a part of the Weather Ready Nation, send me an email, and I have my information right there. Send me an email to find out if you're in the region, the Micronesia Mariana Island region, how you can be a part of the Weather Ready Nation, and we start that dialogue from there. So thank you all for attending today, and I hope you can take this home and use it in your organization, all about communications. And I want to hear from you about the presentation and how you like to use this in your operations. So David, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, actually, so now we'll go to questions. If anybody has questions for Landon. There actually is already one here on the Facebook side. So it's asking, how are you getting info around response actions to the public after giving the weather and alert info? And then when how do you vary between different weather scenarios?
Okay, go back to that first question. Ask that again. You broke up during the second one.
The question is about how do you, once you give the weather alert, the weather info, how do you explain to people what they do, what sort of response actions they should take, and then how do you vary those depending on the different weather scenarios?
Yeah, when we deliver the weather information, that already comes with preparedness and precautionary actions in mind. So if we're looking at a credible threat for any of our islands, we're going to put out that information, the variabilities, but also refer them to different places and sources of information. Guam Homeland Security, the CNMI Homeland Security Emergency Management Office in Saipan, they are fantastic for having all kinds of preparedness plans, and they'll be putting out information to the civilian populations on what actions to take. Our text bulletins, when we're communicating on social media, we will link to our text bulletins so they can click that link and find the exact bulletin that we're referring to, whether it's our typhoon public advisories or a hurricane or typhoon local statement. Those statements will have all the actions to take for people to prepare ahead of and actions to take during a storm. And again, that's the local statement when a typhoon or tropical storm is passing nearby or overhead. And if we don't address something specifically, anyone can email our Facebook page to get more detailed information. We also link to the Homeland Security offices because they provide a lot of preparedness information, from preparedness kits, survival tips, and preparedness actions ahead of different weather scenarios.
Yeah, that's always been my impression, that the Weather Service, once they issue the warnings, the alerts, they pass it over somewhat to Homeland Security, to local managers in that field for the emergency response. Okay, any other questions for Landon? While we have him. I don't have any more. I don't have any questions in the text. You're free to unmute too and ask if you would like. And I mean, I'm really glad we had this topic, because this is a really dense. I mean, if you work in this field, and if you're a frequent user, reader of social media, you know this is a complicated issue, and it's something that you know, you don't have a typhoon every day, and you don't have high surf every day, but this issue of communication you deal with every day. So
yeah, it's a matter of what we're communicating, how we're communicating, and of course the argument comes through in from some folks in the Weather Service that social media is not a mandatory duty of Weather Service employees. It's not a requirement of shift functions. But we as public servants to the community, as the Weather Service meteorologists, our top priority is to protect life and property. And to me, that would convey the fact that should be communicating every way possible so that everybody can get information however they can get it. That, for us on Guam, that includes calling the mayors, and the mayors going out into their villages, to their vulnerable populations, to get that information to people. So a lot of people don't get our webpage, but they sure do get social media. And so if we're not on social media, where are they getting information, and are they even receiving it? And so we have to be in as many places as we can to meet our prerogative.
Yeah, and especially young people. I mean, one of your slides that I really appreciated the most was the breakdown between ages and how they approach the media that they're gonna look at first. Because I'm definitely I'm in the mid 40s, Generation X, where I have some distrust of the social media, so I don't go there first. But definitely
So
the younger than
you're
40.
in the video TV time frame, right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm dragging along with the boomers and who don't even want to get the smartphone. I'm not in that camp quite yet, but
Yeah, we started our Twitter page last year, and the Weather Service is now in its prototyping phase for Instagram. So my office is not into that yet, but probably we may enter the experimental phase for Instagram because that is our second most used platform. But I really want to get our guys consistent and stable on Facebook and Twitter so that we're communicating regularly and consistently on those platforms and properly so that everyone in our operations knows how to best communicate weather hazards to people.
May I ask a question?
yeah, please do.
Hi, Landon. I was wondering if you had any good tips to share on communicating complex ideas to different levels of understanding in the public. That's one of my big challenges is figuring out how to give the message out because we use Facebook in my community as well a good bit, and it does work, especially with our tourist population, because they come hunting us down in Facebook as well as other sources. So getting the message out to many different types of people is important. Have you found any tips or tricks that you could share? And thank you.
Gosh, it's good to see you here, Allison, and I hope things are going great in South Carolina. I hope to visit you maybe later this summer. But as far as communicating with people, and that's always a challenge, how to communicate different principles. And it's always tough when you're dealing with young people, youth, high school, college, and then adults, especially the non-scientists. It really is situation dependent. What are their questions? What principles? What kind of technical discussions are you engaging in? And then how to bring it down to their level. And I think it really depends on each person. If it's more formal in a setting, then we often do those through training seminars and workshops where we can break down these principles and talk to people. What do these terminologies mean? What does this mean to them? And we relate it to them. We keep more the deeper technical perspectives, the science, the equations out of it. And we just do it more of a two-way communications. And the workshops, they're great. Social media, it's great because they can ask you those questions and you can add clarification accordingly.
Thank you very much. That was helpful.
I'm wondering if anybody from the South Pacific would like to chime in about what's most effective down there in terms of like, is it still radio based? Is Facebook the primary way of conveying information? Do people use Twitter? So I've been over in Hawaii now for a year. But my perspective is Hawaii and Guam. Landon's is Guam and Micronesia. But I'm wondering, what do people find the most effective in the South Pacific?
Hi, David. It's me, Silipa here from Samoa.
Hi, Saliba.
Yeah, good to see you.
You
And
too.
thanks again for organizing the. I'll just start off from our side here in Samoa. So just like Landon's presentation, the most effective platform that we use is Facebook. It's widely used in the community now, and almost everyone has a smartphone these days. Uh, but we are still using the old-fashioned radio, TV weather, um, and it's uploaded on our websites. And in the event we have warnings and advisories out, it also goes on SMS through the disaster management office and etc. But one of the interesting things that we discovered in the last few years, and it's a comment from our side, is is how we can reach everyone. So our warnings and advisories has to be inclusive. So we had we had received a message from people with disability, and they visited our offices recently. And that's one of the comments that they mentioned, is that sometimes when we have graphics, so the images are not really clear for them, especially uh, the blind. So they encouraged us to have text. So to have the text accompanying the images that we upload. So that's just one of the comments that we wanted to make from our side. And thanks again for the opportunity. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Saliba. Yeah, so that goes along with Lenny from Solomon says Facebook is most effective too. And we had another question from Fiji. Do you get feedback directly from users post severe weather events?
Yes, and I was just typing a response there.
Okay.
We often get feedback on our social media pages. It's usually positive. Once in a while, there's some negative feedback, but I like to say I want all the feedback, whether it's positive or negative, because that allows us to see what works, what doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, how can we craft it to do a better job? What can we improve for the people, the user? And so I've engaged with that on several occasions last year with some high impact events here on Guam. And I was in touch with one of the guys that gave some feedback, and now we're great friends. And I hope to have him in the office for a tour once it's allowable to see our operations. And I really want to get into a dialogue with him on his sources of information and how we can meet his needs, how we can improve our communications, because that's where we improve as an agency, how we can modify what we do to better serve the community that we sit in. And so, yeah, we definitely get feedback from the community. And oftentimes when there's an event going on, we like to solicit that information. If you have flooding in your area, send us your information, flooding, heights, water, any kind of impacts, because that helps us see exactly what's going on elsewhere across the island, and where our forecasts were verified, or if we didn't quite cover situations properly in our forecasts. As far as flash flooding, did it flood somewhere that we didn't expect it? What are their impacts? So we do like that feedback, just not just impacts, but also on our services, because that's how we improve.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about how social media is particularly useful and Weather Ready Nation by connecting more with people on a familiar level. You take out you demystify the weather service to some degree. You know, it should be an official voice, but it shouldn't be like the weather gods that are telling us.
We're not robots.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Maria, see a comment from Maria. Go ahead, Maria.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to some of you. I'm Maria from Palau. I want to share what we have in Palau. And since some of us in the South Pacific are not familiar with our Palau communication process, I will start explaining how it all started. So for Palau, we are mandated to follow a disaster management framework, which agencies, 28 agencies in Palau are involved when it comes to any disasters. That is a combination of 28 agencies, and whenever or whichever there's a disaster, the committee, which is called National Emergency Committee, gets together to go through what actions to take. So in terms of communication, I am also for social media, but we see a little bit of pushback in that scenario, because since we have the framework, we push for one voice for all the people in Palau. So for a Facebook page to go ahead and pursue whatever comes in from Guam, it was not really an appropriate one in terms of relaying this message to the public, because we're putting out some other stuff which is way ahead of the National Emergency Committee forecast and bulletins. So it came to be an issue where the committee had to meet with the Weather Service employees to make sure that when it comes to any disaster that comes close to our area, the NEMO, or the Emergency Management Office, will take over from there. So there is a little bit of understanding, and of course it was a miscommunication. And I'm not saying that it's not good to pursue for Facebook page and put in all the weather updates on the Weather Service web page on Facebook. But when it comes to a framework which the whole entire Palau needs to address and make sure that it's for the security of our citizens, then we are mandated to follow through with what's required under the national framework. Yes, it is good to pursue and put on all the alerts and updates on Facebook, but there's a limitation to what we can provide if and when there's a disaster. Because it's like there's going to be two different voice coming out to the people of Palau, and the emergency committee did not see that as a good way to go about any disaster. So we try to coordinate and try to compromise that there must be a point where the Emergency Management Office will take over from there. So as we believe that there needs to be only one voice for the people of Palau to see and get updates from.
Thank you, Maria. I think those are some really important points. And it brings up one is the issue like of timing. Like where does the message, if you use social media, where does it go first on social media and then on the more official routes, or what do you do about the timing?
Yeah,
Yes.
That's our policy, is that we do the official text bulletins. That's our watches, warnings, advisories, our forecasts. And then social media, since it's not mandated or required, that's all secondary to our official text bulletins. Because the plan is when we communicate on social media, we link those to the text bulletins so that people get the actual text bulletins when that information is available. So social media, it goes secondary to official watches, warnings, advisories, text bulletins, and also coordination with weather offices in the community. It sounds like the
Yes.
situation in Palau, that's something that we can further discuss about the communication strategy. So Maria, I will be happy to
Yes.
work with you on that.
Yes, I also would like to say thank you, Landon, for giving us a heads up ahead of time. I'm only stressing out that if you're in a position or scenario where you have to put in a watch or warning to Palau, we need to have a communication between your office and my office to see if it is really needed. Just like this past storm, you were putting us in a tropical storm warning, but we stayed back in a watch at all because we, of course, are the emergency committee, have this notion that we know our country better, and we see that it was really, we check all these states with the tides and everything else. So it is really good communication between your office and our office and the emergency committee. And it's also a good correlation of information back and forth. Thank you for sharing of a lot of the technology scenarios and data. And when it comes to our side, we were able to sit back and go through all the needed requirements. And we, of course, got some information and data from other states close to Palau to make sure that we were putting our people in a safe area and zone.
Yeah, and I have your phone number now, so I'm going to be giving you calls at 3 o'clock in the morning again, too.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up there because we're quite a bit over time. But just wanted to say thank you to Landon again. Thank you everybody else for joining us, and thank you also for your input. You joined in the talk. So Landon, you have any party comments?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for joining us, and don't hesitate to shoot me an email if you remember that from earlier. I definitely like to engage with people and talk with people more about the warning and coordination and communications process from our office as well as across the community, because that's where it's at right now is communications. And so we can't get our job effectively done without communicating to each other and with each other. And so it's that face-to-face contact, working together with our partners. That's where we succeed as one industry. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you on social media or on email.
Thank you all.
Okay, I'm gonna end the meeting there.